So let's get started. Of course, we're going to start with some introductions. The topic today, as I hope you all read as you registered, is about helping students stay connected while they're going through the many transitions that happen in recovery and in the student experience, and then just in life in general. One of the big takeaways today is that we're always in transition in some way or another. And so these are some considerations about how we just generally do this work. This will be recorded, so that's cool. Many of you have seen my face, many of you have seen our faces, but I'm on almost all of these webinars. So our guests today are Ariel, Britt, and Rob, Shearon. I'm gonna have them introduce themselves. But if you don't know me, my name is Dylan Dunn, the Technical Assistance Manager for Safe Campuses. Pronouns he, him, his. I'm here to party today, so go ahead, Ariel.
Hi everyone, Air here. I feel like I see some familiar names. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Director of Safe Campuses.
And also, the two of you, what is a transition you've gone through recently?
Oh, yes. Okay. So I am also a person in long-term recovery, and I just transitioned from 8 years in recovery to 9 years in recovery in a pandemic. And I'll tell you what, that celebration looked differently. I bought my own balloon. I did.
I saw the balloon. Bought it one day early. I liked it. But then hit it just in case. I loved it. Hi everyone. My name is Rob Shearon, and I am the program manager at the Collegiate Recovery Center in Boulder at University of Colorado. I use he, him, his pronouns, and a recent transition. I was just talking to my colleague about this transition, and it was like a culmination of so many transitions that COVID has created. I used to live in a house. I was just giving Dylan and Era a tour of my house. I'm like a very social person, so living in a house alone as of recent, working remote, and just back and forth between an empty college campus and an empty home is this big transition that I've been going through, that is really, as a person in long-term recovery who gets a lot of their whatever recovery capital from interactions with others, I've had to really transition and find new ways to kind of just be in this world. So yeah, thanks for the question, Dylan.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, both of you. We'll hear a lot from you both here in about 10 to 12 minutes as I move into the content, I guess. We're gonna go back. Here we go. So the overview of today, I'm gonna give a quick and dirty student development theory nerd overview of transition theory. Those of you who have kind of done student development theory stuff before, this is not going to be anything new. I don't think that beginning piece and a lot of the things you're going to be looking forward to are at the latter half. Those of you who have never done student development theory before, or adult development theory, this might be brand new, and I hope to do my best. We're going to talk about case studies. Rob and Eric are going to go through some really great case studies that should help kind of illuminate some examples of what students might be going through. And then we're going to do Q&A. So put your questions in the chat as we go. We can answer them kind of as we go if necessary or as appropriate. And then you might just have some additional questions at the end. And then we're really kind of going to hit the summit of this conversation talking about a brand new app that Aaron and Rob have launched called Reconnected, which is so cool. And I hope you're still here at the end to hear about it. We're going to do some learning today. So as you know, the recording of this will be sent out to each of you afterwards. If someone's missed it that was hoping to be here, they can get that link if they registered, or it'll be on YouTube as well. But we really appreciate those of you who did show up in person today, because it gives us some folks to talk to. That's always fun. So again, we're going to start with talking about Schlossberg's transition theory. I'm going to get that name. I'm going to struggle to say it over and over again because it's a lot of S's and sh's. We're going to call it transition theory probably. But it's a framework for us to understand the rest of the conversation when we're thinking about our case studies. So we're gonna go through the quick and dirty of it. It's a pretty simple theory anyway, but they'll give us some conversation pieces. So according to this theory, transition is any event or non-event that results in changed relationships, routines, assumptions, and roles. So that's broad, it's purposefully broad, because again, we're going through transitions all the time and we're always navigating changes in our lives. It just kind of depends on how significant those changes are. And so Rob and Eric, quickly, I don't know if you have any thoughts on some examples of transitions that students in recovery commonly experience before we get to the
Things
case
that
study.
really come to mind is just this, any time there's a shift in your schedule, you know, just trying to navigate, and I can say this, what's so different about students in recovery in a way, there is a lot, like making sure that they're taking care of themselves, and that transition is super hard depending on where they're coming from. It's like, how do I maintain my recovery and my recovery support as that's changing, as I'm growing in my recovery and understanding what that is. And then also being just a student, right? Like, can I ever just be a student? So that's something that I know that they're constantly navigating. Like, what is really, I'm so much more, just that multifaceted, holistic person, right?
Rob, any quick examples?
Yeah, like, I mean, every semester, right, with the schedule change is a big one that I see like students having to navigate. And then a big one that stands out for me, like for some students, is that transition of community, like from one community to another, with like sometimes we label colleges as like a recovery hostile environment, with especially like their friend group. So like just like walking around campus is sometimes like difficult, or just brings up a lot for students that I see.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely talk about some more transitions as we get to the case studies. Something just I want to mention quick before we move forward and skip a bunch of slides, is the thing about this definition I think is important is that it kind of talks about transitions as something that are kind of always happening, but we can kind of differentiate them as necessary to help and be helpers. But really, you can see in this that because it's constantly happening, the key to a healthy transition is flexibility and kind of being resilient, and but being just ultimately just being flexible. And like we always like to talk about trauma in these webinars because it's deeply, deeply important. And I kind of a connection I want to make here quickly is that, again, we know that 2/3 of folks who develop a substance use disorder have experienced trauma or have reported trauma. And so a lot of this is about building transition skills. And we know that trauma becomes like rigidity in response to events. Transition skills are kind of purposefully unlearning some of those things and kind of softening those scars. So doing this in a trauma-informed manner is incredibly important. We have the previous webinar on that if you missed it or you want to talk more about that. So I'm going to try to get through this in the next 5 or so minutes. So just some key terms and some key parts of the transition theory is that we know that a transition and what it is and how it is as helpers, it's our job to kind of first work with students to understand how they understand the transition. What is it to them? And so in order to figure out what that means and what it means to them, we can often think of 3 different parts of a transition. So there's the type of the transition. Is it anticipated? Is it unanticipated? Is it a non-event? We're actually going to have an example of a non-event later that Ariel is going to speak on a little bit. Anticipated is pretty obvious what that means. You see it coming. Unanticipated, it's a surprise. Non-events can get kind of complicated because they can be many different things, but I think the easiest way to understand the most common non-events are expectations that someone had that no longer, that were like they had a good reason to expect them, but those are no longer going to happen for various reasons. Again, we'll give some examples of that later so you can keep moving through this, but really you want to first ask a student like what happened, how do they understand what happened? And then there's the context of, again, the relationship between the transition and its setting. Where did it happen? When did it happen? How did it happen? Kind of filling out the picture. And then the impact. How has this changed your life? And depending on how students understand the various pieces of these will kind of help us choose what our decisions making is going to be about how we help that student. I do want to mention that a lot of us, sometimes it can be hard to sit with a student and let them fully talk about a transition they're going through, especially if you're not sure that their understanding of that transition is helpful or truly or fully accurate. I encourage all of us to take a minute and just listen anyway first, get a full picture of what they think, their experience is of the transition before giving any but what ifs or are you sure or things like that. Like we need to first validate and before we begin, if necessary, to challenge or reframe. And this theory purposefully sets itself up that way. And so you'll see that in the next part of the theory. That first, we just need to understand what the student is going through and how they understand their experience. Because there are 4 factors for folks when it comes to how they cope with transitions. And so in order to understand how folks cope, we need to understand 4 factors. So first, you need to understand the situation again. So what do we know and what don't we know? So we can properly approach the situation as helpers and as folks going through the transition. Understanding a student's sense of self, their personal development, their identities, the way they are entering this situation and the world in general can help us get a better sense of entry points for support. And then self also, it's important to talk about like integrity and self-efficacy when you're talking about self, because those are huge skills that students can lean on of this is hard, but I know this is more important to me, or this is most important to me that I can lean on to get through this situation. And then strategies, coping skills. The coping skills that we talk about a lot are helping a student learn to modify the situation. So maybe change their surroundings, change something about what happened, or the next one is kind of controlling the meaning of what happened. So helping students reframe of maybe a student got a C on an exam and they're panicking because it's the end of the world, right? But it's actually like, can we reframe the situation to say, oh, this is actually bigger than this. You still have 4 weeks left. You still have X, Y, and Z. Yes, this is stressful and this is a transition because of grieving your past identity as a person who never had to study, or grieving like your great, all of these things that we're going through, kind of filling out the picture, but also when able and when kind of there's a good stepping in point, saying, are there different ways we can think about this? Well, also like additive ways to think about it, not invalidating ways to think about it. And that's a balance. And then the third of the strategies that we use with students is just stress management and coping strategies. Do students have skills to manage their stress? Not all students do. And that's why I asked the question on this slide of, do they have effective coping skills? And do they know that they have effective coping skills? I talked to Ariel a couple weeks ago, maybe a week ago now, about how one of the transformative moments in my life as someone who was being helped was someone asked me, Dylan, how would you have responded to this if you were 3 or 4 years old? What skills did you have then? And I was like, I would go outside without my coat on because it was cold outside and I was anxious and my brain was hot. So I would go outside, literally cool off, come back inside, and I would feel better. And that would get me so I could then use my other skills and my other approaches to then get through things that were confusing as a kid or things that were difficult. So it sometimes can be helpful to ask our students, what would you have used to have done? And maybe it can also then illuminate for them skills they have learned or skills they have unlearned, especially students in recovery. I used to drink over it. I used to go and call a good friend about it who actually was not helpful for me. Like you can sit with them in those decision-making processes. And then of course, we need to understand who's on a student's team. Who are they bringing with them through this transition, or who can they bring with them to help kind of lean on folks in a way that is healthy and productive. So those are some of the things that we consider, we think about when we're talking about helping students through transitions. All right, so that was a lot of stuff and I just ran through it. Hopefully it was helpful. We'll return to it kind of through these case studies so we can use them in action so that they're not just lost in these previous 4 slides. But I'm now going to pass it over to Ariel and Rob to talk about some of these case studies I came up with.
Hello. Oh man, Dylan, you brought me back to that C example. We were talking about that before, and that literally was my life. My first C when I came back to school was so heartbreaking because I thought now that I was in recovery, I was going to be super, super smart. And looking back now, it's just amazing how my program manager at the time was able to hold space for me. And this story right here is my story. I was literally like a year sober, decided to go back and finish my degree. And my plan at the time was just to get in and get out. I wanted to move back to New York City. I had friends in Brooklyn. My recovery community was there. So I wasn't really looking for a place of deep engagement. But at that time, the Collegiate Recovery Program at the University of Michigan had just started up. And luckily, I had Matt Statman there, who was so good to me from the standpoint of what everything Dylan was saying. I think seeing him as a helper and not as somebody who was going to fix my problems, but be a clear support person for me to get connected to the community was super huge. And as I even was getting ready to graduate, like I said, my plan was to move and go back, but I had created so much community and so much connection during that year or so, only had 2 semesters left, that I decided to stay. And so for me, that was like a huge non-event. I'd set myself up to feel like, oh, I'm going to be done. I'm never going to come back here again. And then how did Matt really help me navigate that decision? So the next slide. So the biggest portion I think Matt was able to help me see was that I did not have an existing community of support in Michigan. For me, the most harmful thing that could have happened to me was for me to not get engaged somehow. And so being somebody that was very much so connected, I remember going to a 12-step meeting and meeting a couple students there that were part of the collegiate recovery community, and then having a space where I could go just to talk, and meeting him and being somebody that I could talk to. That way my community started to really form, and it was such a change maker, because I was going back to, like Rob was saying before, an hostile, abstinent environment. But not just that, right? This is a place that I remember that party that I got crazy in, right? I remember some harm that I caused down the street. And so I was even experiencing some sort of flashback to my old life, and was super afraid of seeing people that I used with, or that I owed money to, like whatever it was, like it was really, really important. So that was a huge, huge piece for me. So like Rob, the biggest thing, I know you also see this is probably one of the most common situations we see with students. They're usually non-traditional students coming back. What have you worked with your students on in terms of strategies to kind of help them be involved too?
Right. So yeah, they come back and they've taken time off from school generally. So they have had some sort of experience, whether it be they went to school at CU Boulder, where I'm at, or are transferring from another school. But they're coming in with some sort of like understanding of what recovery is, whether they've, like, the biggest case is like they went and got treatment somewhere and are coming back. But it's very, very important, especially if they're returning to campus. They've been here before and they have a community that might be a couple years ahead of them now that they used to party with. So upon returning, like, they know a little the gist of recovery. So I don't have to focus on explaining like the backstory of what it could look like. They know that now. So just getting them engaged right away with the community. And sometimes those students are, like, their foundation is strong enough that they can start to take on leadership positions within the community right away and start being of service. So that's why at school we can have this application process where they can become like a core member and much more engaged.
Absolutely. And I had an idea of what that transition was. For me, it was to get in, get out, right? But during that process of being connected and finding purpose, because I was so like, I'm a New Yorker now. I'm not even from Michigan anymore. I had this idea and this facade that my relationship was kind of different. So being able to find a space where I could be, like you said, create purpose, offer support to folks that are at different stages was so important for me to kind of have that different level of connection, because I wasn't, in my mind, brand new. I was just in transition, waiting to go back. And then that really shifted. And then when I didn't go back, what was really cool was that Matt encouraged me to stay as part of the community. So as soon as I was done graduating, something just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right for me to move back to Brooklyn and go back to the city life, but I still hadn't formed what my life would look like next. And so I kept being a part of that community for a year until I went to grad school. And then I, continued to stay. And so that was really helpful too. There was no point where it was like, you've aged out of this community. See you next time.
Well, that's not a normal resource in higher education, right? There's no revenue. You're not a dues paying student anymore. So like and that's where the collegiate recovery community is unique. And it's really my job to help people that I work with understand that just because they've graduated does not mean support ends there. It's like I always said, the way I explain it to my upper management is like, it's just a return on our investment. If we continue to support these students in one of the largest transitions of their life, graduating college, it's going to be rough. We see it all the time. If we support them through that, I mean, today I just connected one student with an alumni because like they had some interests that were similar, and that alumni was graduated 18 months ago, had no problem connecting.
Right. And then it's so important too, because I think especially in most of these spaces, and I've been a Collegiate Recovery Program coordinator, like I can't support all of the students at their various needs. So having somebody that's more established in their recovery or at a place of being an alumni, yes, Zachary, totally, keeping alumni engaged is huge. We oftentimes really think about the students coming in as maybe needing the most support, but I'm telling you, the students going out and realizing what the world is going to look like again as you're now a college graduate, especially now during COVID, it's going to be different, and they're going to still need that connection and that bridge to safety, not even to safety, but to community, right? To purpose, to remembering that like, no matter where you are, your experience in recovery on a collegiate recovery campus or in a campus in general is helpful. It's valid. It still matters. And it's such a great way for a lot of folks to give back. And for me, I don't think I would have been able to go to grad school or thought about going to grad school without it.
Right.
Yeah.
And Zachary, I wanted just to engage with that comment you made about the CRC being fully open, all the services open to alumni. At CU, we're not all of our services would make sense for alumni, and sometimes we do have to like help the alumni see like, hey, actually engaging with coming to this all the time like actually isn't allowing you to grow in other areas, but I'm here to support you like in making that transition. So yeah, it's definitely like our doors are still open and we connect. It's just it looks a little different for our alumni.
Mm-hmm. All right,
Rob. Oh,
Rob.
cool. This is me. Yeah. Nice-ish. So this case study is one that I myself experienced as a student, not even knowing I wouldn't even said that I'm seeking recovery. I just needed to figure my life out is how I would have rather put it. And I see this all the time working here at school is we have certain campus partners. One department's called Student Support and Case Management. Another is called, or CAPS, or like Counseling and Psychiatric Services. Like those are probably our two biggest referrals. So they'll refer students over all the time to meet with one of our staff, and having that student generally comes in with some sort of preconceived idea or stigma about like what recovery is, and how they only want like a little part of it, or like so really I have to kind of re-explain what recovery is, because they've never heard it broken down the way, the way we do here at CU, and so many, I'm sure, at your colleges as well, that people are listening right now. So helping them to understand, like, what does recovery even look like now? And so breaking it down and then helping them come up with some sort of plan immediately, to help like disengage from the behaviors that they're in right now, and then re-engage with community. So social events are really key for these students that are coming in, because what we're asking them to do is essentially give up what they consider to be their college experience. That's what they hear when we're saying, like, we think you should be in recovery as a college student. And so social engagement, helping get them really connected to the community, is one of our biggest ways we do that. What are some?
I think so too. So even piggybacking off of that, right? I think there's such a difference between, so even asking what's important to them, oftentimes they're just like, I just want to graduate. And then sometimes like, I just want to stop using, but I don't want to give up going to school. It's important for me to graduate on time and get this done. And so really trying to gauge, and that's the beautiful thing about motivational interviewing or trauma-informed approaches to this work, is really helping them kind of map that out and empowering them right away at that point to see what that looks like. Because sometimes, you have those aha moments with students where it's like, oh man, well, maybe I do need to take a semester off to put my recovery first, engage with other students, stay connected, and then come back. And that's really heartbreaking. And it's not only heartbreaking, it's heartbreaking oftentimes for their relationship with their parents, right? Or they don't want to feel like they're failing at all. And so it's just important for us to even engage at that level at times too, to support them along those like heavier conversations and mapping out.
Right. Yeah, one of the questions I asked them is, just imagine for a moment that you had an assistant to take care of all these pesky problems that you're going through right now. Like, what would you have them? What would you delegate to them? And then they'll like start to tell me, and at this point I'm writing them down, like, and I'm like, I'm your assistant. All right, let's go through each one of these and see how the resources of the recovery center make sense. And sometimes those are beyond the recovery center, right? If a student has suffered like some pretty severe consequences, I'm like, oh, well, the recovery center isn't the place that you can like delegate this to. You're going to need to get some support from another place. And so then we start really using this ecosystem of like a college campus that has so many resources that students are so unaware of a lot of times.
So even going into this, right, the focus is recovery support, peer-to-peer support, and connection to outside resources, right? Because one thing that's always important is the collegiate recovery community, it's not treatment, and it's not in those spaces. And you may find a student at this phase in transition where they need to be connected more heavily with clinical services, counseling services on campus too, right? If that's not something embedded, and oftentimes embedded in the collegiate recovery community, then also like outside support and help, whether it's sober living, other spaces like that, where they have a safe space. Because that is one of the hugest things that I've seen. One of my best friends went through this too. She was at a point where she was finally ready to stop using substances, but she lived with people that's like literally all they did. And so a lot of the questions that I ask and would ask and was asked of her was just centered around her safety. What was important to her? How would you feel safe in continuing and feel empowered to continue into this experience of your recovery and of your schooling, so that was super huge too.
Right. And the transitions that are taking place that I'm seeing a lot right now, they, along with just getting students getting sober, are trying to like find recovery during COVID, is what we're asking, what people are telling them to do is stop engaging with the harmful community and start engaging with a helpful community. Well, the helpful communities right now are very limited in how they can come together. So generally the harmful communities have no problem getting together. Like, so I've
Yeah.
seen students have no problem, easy access to social interaction centered around partying. However, the recovery support is very limited to Zoom. And so their social interaction, they haven't seen people. If they're really disengaging from this harmful community, sometimes they haven't seen people in person in months and actually connected with them. And so all they're doing. So it's really important for me right now to draw on these outside resources that have a little more flexibility and freedom and can truly meet the students like where they are at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's such a tough time, and what a great point, because those harmful communities, they don't care, right? They don't care. Like um this is tough. Can you share an example of outside resources for students to be connected?
Yeah.
So yeah, so for if you're in Colorado, which a lot of people are not in Colorado, but Rob, Dylan, and I are, just in terms of community engagement and spaces that are still open that do it well. One place that I always recommend is the Phoenix, which is an organization that I used to work at, a space where you can be in the gym with other folks that are in recovery, connecting with people offline. Sometimes they have really great outdoor adventures. I know for me, there are some meetings, like I said before, I'm in 12 step 2, and there's some meetings that are happening in person outside. Sure, you have to bundle up now, but just being able to research and see what is actually happening in person and what feels safe feels really, really great. And those are the things that I can definitely, that's like the beauty of being a part of the community and knowing what's happening on the inside. As somebody that is able to be an administrator and offer support, particularly here, but I think it just shifts depending upon where you live and making sure that you know what's still going on. But I know some folks are still doing some outdoor safe programming that feels really good to just see other people.
Yeah, exactly. I just know all the local resources that are still doing in-person events. And then I've asked my current students and alumni that are regularly engaged, I just asked them, hey, are you comfortable with me connecting you with someone that may want to grab coffee or meet in person? And I really let them like make that decision. And so where I am unable to, as a program manager, host like events underneath the CRC in person due to like the limitations that are consistently changing. So that's like the biggest, like we're talking about transitions at my school, we've changed 4 or 5 times this semester on what we are and what we aren't allowed to do. So the boxes have changed size consistently. And so what I made it a point to do is ask our students who is willing to go on hikes with people and just use what we have around us and get them connected, always in groups of like three or 4, like is
Right.
usually what I try to do. So it's not putting all that responsibility on one student.
Yeah, and the Phoenix too is also hosting events online. And that's just a resource that I always offer outside of 12 step, because that's not many folks, I mean, it's a lot of folks' pathway, but a lot of students are choosing their own journey on how to engage in their recovery. But health and getting into your body and being in your body oftentimes feels a lot more universal, whether it's yoga, some HIIT, some lifting, some of that. I think they even just have social hangouts via Zoom. But that way you can meet people from across the nation that are just trying to connect with other people and talk. So that's also happening a lot. Exactly. Not all recovery support is directly focused on recovery itself. And that's also the beauty about collegiate recovery spaces too, because it's really about how are we going to come in here, stay connected, have that common understanding, but graduate and have a really good time doing that and feel supported in that, right? And so there are some definite spaces like that out there that are doing some great national work.
And especially when it comes to graduation, like,
Yes.
you know, I have focused with our soon-to-be graduates, and all this semester, that was like a huge source of their anxiety was how it's going to look, what it's going to look like. And so connecting them, of course, with our career services department, they've actually been able to offer so many more opportunities for practice interviews, like in group setting, just because of Zoom. So that has been a very helpful partner, our career services department on campus. And, you know, it's about helping them understand that whatever their next step is not like the biggest, like they feel like I have to get the dream job as soon as I graduate. That's what I run into. It has to be very specific in this industry. And so it's all about just reaching out to either people like our current, like our alumni, and I've connected our alumni with alumni from other collegiate recovery programs that I know were looking for similar jobs, and like just to help them have a conversation, because it only goes so far coming from me. At some point I become like the mom or the dad, like again, they're like, all right, yeah, I stopped listening 5 minutes ago. So helping connect them with different perspectives.
Yeah, even looking at this case study is so huge. We don't know exactly what they were looking forward to or why they were looking forward to the possibility of moving home after graduation. But that idea, that hope, that idea of control as to how things are going to look. I mean, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's like, be flexible, be open to anything happening. And so I think that was something that, we both really experienced that. I mean, we graduated and had high expectations for what life would look like after graduation, moved away. And it was just like, oh no, this is tough. It was really, really tough. And so I know I moved away probably, how long did it take for you to move? I think I was like 6 months after I graduated, I moved to the South. How long were you?
Yeah. 9 months and I moved to New York.
Right. So I was already so connected. Things are just different. Those are totally opposite populations, right? Like for me, this from the Midwest to the South, from you from Colorado all the way to New York, it was so different. But I think for me, I did have some support, but it was just different. Recovery looked really different in the South to me. But I'm grateful that I had that connection still as an alumni with my program coordinator. Them being able to be somebody that I could feel like I could call on was super huge. Getting connected with them via social media and just having them like, hey, how's it going? Just checking in. It wasn't something every day or anything like that, but that was really, really important. And then when my experience in Georgia got really tough for me, they were one of the first people that I called to talk over that. Like, what is important to me? was it important for me to like stick it out and stick working and feeling really unsafe or scared? Was my recovery faltering? And that those questions were like, it was very true for me. Like I was really worried about that. And I had all these expectations. Like I finally thought I was going to make it and it was going to be the greatest thing ever. And then I missed that sense of community and social support that I had within my collegiate recovery community.
Yeah, that like I had a very, very similar thing. And when I was in New York, this like struggle, and I had a really strong recovery community, peers in recovery in New York. However, it is different to have a professional that works in recovery. Like that's their job. So I was so grateful that I was able to reach back out to the CRP staff. And like, this wasn't like I was calling them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis at this point. I'd graduated 3 years prior and just stayed in touch, and they were able to help me. I didn't even understand there was other resources out there besides like recovery communities. I was like, oh, wow, you can go to a program for a week and they can help you move through some of these things that are coming up for you, that we see a lot of people a couple years into their recovery. What did you say? There's more monsters on the bus or something like that the other day? Like,
there are more monsters on
they
that
start
bus.
to show, right? And so to have a professional help just like point out different resources that may be available to you. And one thing I also wanted to touch on, that if I do know a student is moving to a particular area, like instead of just talking about what they're going to do when they get there, some like really tangible things is like, they know where they're going to live, to look up the like geographic location of the supports around them, and to like have like them set up a phone call or some sort of interaction with somebody in that area, and set up a date to meet them when they get there. Like not like, oh, well, I'll hit you up when I move up. It's like, no, like schedule that now. And so, because you just have to be the wise mind for that individual, because they're thinking.
Yep, outside. So exactly, the future recovery support plan is super vital. There's such a strong drop off and shifts, and when anybody moves, when anybody is doing that, but especially the isolation that comes for folks that are in recovery when they're moving, is it can feel and is oftentimes tenfold. Because now they're not just a student anymore. They don't have that same identification. They're not a student. They're not a student in recovery. They're not a part of the collegiate recovery community. They're just a worker among workers at times, or they're trying to figure it out. So how can we support them and then also keep them engaged as an alumni? It's such a great way to offer that help. Next one.
Oh, perfect.
And the best way ever. Rob, do you want to? How many folks have heard about Reconnect Dead? If you have, if you haven't, this is great. This is Rob's brainchild. There's some folks raising hands. Nice. Rob, do you want to talk about literally how this came up?
Totally. Well, there used to be like this collegiate recovery skiathon leadership conference that took place, and at that conference we there was like an alumni panel of students, graduates, CRP graduates, and so I was on that. Actually, I was moderating the panel. I thought I was going to just be on the panel, so it was like a surprise in the moment, but we just all shared it was like the first time alumni had all been in the room sharing their experience on what it was like to move on from this community. And so, and a lot of patterns were just like noticeable about like how people, like collegiate recovery programs are almost so successful, they create their own problems. they create such a supportive environment for someone like in recovery on a college campus. And then that person graduates and moves somewhere, and the drop off is such a large transition. It's so dramatic, to be like really held. So like, and this is exactly what we were talking about, of just how, yes, as professionals working in the collegiate recovery field, we can support alumni to an extent, but how nice would it be was like to know where other collegiate recovery alumni are. You know, I met, when I moved to New York, I ended up meeting a handful of like CRP grads, and I was like, holy shit, like we spoke the same language. We were like, so it wasn't just my 12-step community, it was like a even stronger bond. And so we're like, it'd be so cool if we just knew where everyone was located. And I mean, this has been going on for years. Like someone tells you they're moving somewhere or they're looking for a job in some sort of location, you immediately like, oh, well, you should meet like my friend who graduated from here, from like this recovery program, you two should connect. And so that's what we set out to do, exactly that. Create this app that allows like people, no matter where they are, no matter where they're going or what they're looking for in terms of like professional, social, or recovery connections, that they can like get that from this app.
Yes, it's such a wonderful thing. It's a free app for students. So I know that Brittany is in the room somewhere. I'm trying to find that spreadsheet with all of the schools that we're able to drop. But right now, this is just more to learn about it. We are still in a time where we're continuing to take feedback. It's free. And just especially now during these times, we want to make sure that if a student or alumni is making a move, that they are connected, that they can right away look on the map and see who's already there, shoot them a message and engage, or find national events that are going on right now to connect. Because this doesn't seem to be, we're still in such a deep place of an unknown that apps, anything like this is just more important now than it ever has been. I mean, it was important back then. I know, like Rob is speaking, I really struggled at this transition point in my life. And then I also think about the students and my friends that are no longer here. There was the strong drop off and they didn't make it, you know, because of that isolation, because of those things that they're experiencing. And so it's just something that we're really, really excited and grateful that we're able to make Rob's brainchild a reality. And we're going to keep growing and keep making it as best we can, but it's just live now. So if you are a university and you need your school code to share with students, or if you want to check it out yourself, please drop your name in the chat and I will find your code for you.
Yeah. And one thing that I want to make sure people know, and like how you can help us, is to share this app with your current students or alumni. It's something that I've noticed, especially since COVID, like this demand in a sense for like, we have this drop off in participation for these virtual events, yet somehow like I feel like I'm creating more opportunities, more virtual events for students to go to. And it sucks. I hate it. Like, I'm like, oh God, all this, like, so the other 2 weeks ago, we like teamed up, and we have been through this semester is teaming up with different schools across Colorado to combine our virtual event efforts, essentially. So we had the ARHE like mountain region, we had a pumpkin carving contest, and we had like 6 different schools show up, 18 different students, and everyone just sat in front of their computer, carved some pumpkins, you know? And I didn't even have to organize it. It was amazing. Like CU Denver did. It was brilliant. And so that's something we're really looking forward to getting done and helping with, is as we continue with this virtual programming to help like refer our students to something going on with other students in recovery that they can participate in.
Awesome. Dylan's back.
I'm back. I'm alive. Yeah, what folks have questions, like burning desires, things that are just on the top of their head that they want to talk about. We have, I think for the first time in a webinar, we've actually reserved time for questions and answers. And so even Rob or Ariel, if you have questions for the chat or things you still want to talk about, we still have plenty of time. We do have one question in the Q&A that says, Ariel, what did you say to put in the chat in regards to a code for Reconnected?
I said what university you're from so I can send your code to you.
A little bit about the code is, so each college or each university has their unique college code just to ensure that whoever downloads the app really is like part of the recovery community. So if you don't have your code, please reach out to us and we'll get it to you.
Yes, folks are requesting in the chat.
There is a code for Nebraska, Lincoln.
I'm finding them.
Perfect. Awesome.
Let's see. I don't have any other questions, Dylan.
Yeah, folks in the chat, I mean, I'm gonna do a quick overview of another kind of like a way that another one of our projects is gonna be helping transitions. And then as we go, we can, as soon as I finish that, we can answer more questions that folks may have put in the chat. So yeah, we'll be talking about Kristen's question as well here in a second. This is something I'm really excited to kind of, the Reconnected support for students is going to be really, really well supported with institutional data for staff through a census project we just launched on Tuesday, which is basically us having you all help us gather data on what does your university have, what can you offer students right now, or what can your university usually offer students. And so it's about a 25 to 35, sometimes 40 if you have a lot on your campus, minute survey of, yeah, what do you offer students institutionally? And then also what, if you don't offer certain things, do you refer students to different resources? This will then become a dashboard where you can benchmark with sister schools or schools in your area, especially if you're looking to help a student go to a grad school at a different university or make that move into maybe another college town. They can use the data that folks are reporting in this survey to kind of asset map of, okay, Rob's moving to New York. There happens to be a school right there, and they send all of their students to this certain meeting that's in the community. And so whether a student's moving to a city for like purpose of grad school or just to be there, the data in this will also be really helpful on top of then the personal connections they're going to get through Reconnected as that app continues to grow. So yeah, safeproject.us/census. I'll type it in the chat here in a second, but please take it. Please encourage your colleagues to take it. The potential of this making all of our jobs a lot easier in terms of advocacy and supporting our students is nearly infinite because it's just, we all can know what everyone else is doing in a helpful but not an intrusive way. So yeah, that's super exciting. And then, yeah, also let me know if you have questions about Reconnected, the census, or then anything else we talked about today, because we still have 5 minutes. So Kristen had asked, what research are you tracking with the app? So is there anything like data-wise that we are kind of using the app to track or?
Right now, no. We're like the primary like focus of the app, and like Air and myself and Brittany and a few other people that are working on it is really just to, well, there's two focuses. One, to get as many people to like be able to sign up and like so we can like help build a network of people able to connect. That's where our energy is going. And as well as like it's pretty new, so a lot of people that have signed up are like helping us so much get like feedback on like, hey, this isn't working in the app, or like, hey, it'd be great if it was like this. So right now we're still in like the like tinkering phase of the app, and so no, Kristen, we haven't focused on like if there can be like research or like helpful patterns that we
Wait.
notice.
Yeah, but no data, any of that will be shared either too. And I think that's also a lot of that security piece of what's going to be happening. How are we storing that information? It is not used. There's no like social dilemma about it.
It's been, yeah, from the
That's
beginning,
really
it's been cool to see.
important to know.
Yeah, it's been cool to see the conversations really focus on security around the app. I know, Rob, you've had probably a million of those conversations with the folks who've been supportive since day one. And security is like top notch on that app. And like, I mean, safe, a lot of our work, our focus is rarely on gathering student data of any sort, because we don't know, we want to be able to promise that is as safe and secure as possible. So even the census is institutional, generally accessible data, and then Reconnected is pretty secure.
Yeah, there's no, well, you just want to make the app available to people to help. Like I like to say, like, so they can just thrive in their recovery, whether that's like find their next job or figure out like a new roommate if they're moving somewhere, or like find like a fun event to go to. Like that's the focus right now, 100%.
Someone's going to find their future spouse on that app, and you're going to have a hell of a time that day when you learn about that.
Awesome. Oh, wow. Do you have to have an Apple ID, Rob? I don't think so. Isn't there an option to not have an Apple ID?
You can sign in with,
An email, right?
I don't know. I
I
think
don't-
you have to have, you can like hide your Apple ID when you're signing in, Zach.
I think you can hide your Apple ID, but Android, it's also for Android as well.
And Kristen, as of yesterday, we have like 123 people that are have downloaded or like using the app. So
Yay. I think that's it.
The last kind of thank you, of course, to Aaron, Rob. I thank you all the time because you're wonderful. Thank you for your time. Thanks for your preparation for this. And thanks for everyone who attended. I know December around finals week is not always the greatest time to have a webinar, but look forward, because obviously this is the final of our fall webinar. So thank you for those who happen to have been to all four. That's a pretty big deal for us to see folks kind of come back and keep engaging in this work in this way. But in the spring, we have a really cool change where the spring webinars are going to be focused on students and how students can get involved in this work and how they can be the folks who come to webinars, where we can kind of, if professionals want to come and then pass the information directly to their students. It's part of our Leadership Academy. So if students want to kind of get a preview of what the Leadership Academy could look like, the spring webinars are going to be fully accessible to your students as long as you're on our listserv. So if you have not been getting emails from Safe Campuses team, you can send me a message through Eventbrite, or you can send any of us an email, and we'll make sure you get on those. And then life becomes a lot easier if you follow us on social media, because we post all of these webinars on social media. But the spring ones actually may not be posted on social media because they're student-centered, and we don't want, kind of trying to do our best to keep them contained to students. And so it may be more effective for you to follow us to get kind of the professional focus stuff. And then we would send you the student webinar stuff via email. So yeah, that's all we got. Hopefully this was helpful for folks. I enjoyed the conversation. It's always good to hear Aaron, Rob just speak it out and give us all the wisdom. So thank you both.
thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Sarah.
Happy holidays, everyone. Happy holidays.
Peace, Kristen.
Peace, Kristen. Baby coming.